Today we're going to learn about the building blocks of JavaScript. Let's get started. Hey there everyone, I hope you've had a good previous week, and I hope you're ready to jump into the basic building blocks of JavaScript today. Today, with learning the basic blocks of JavaScript, we'll learn what really goes on in the language. Because last episode, we wrote a little script that printed something out for us in order to interact with the DOM. But today, we'll actually learn about the inner workings, why JavaScript works the way it does, and what we really have the power to manipulate in order to write our own programs. So with that, let's go ahead and directly jump into the discussion of what makes JavaScript work. In order to begin to understand JavaScript, you have to understand a bit of its background and really what type of programming language it is. To keep it nice and simple and without getting too deep into the swamp of all the inner workings, JavaScript, originally named ECMAScript or ECMA script, is a programming language that's specifically meant to work in browsers, like I had explained last episode. However, it primarily functions under a method that is referred to as object-oriented programming. With object-oriented programming, a lot of the logic that you build out and a lot of the functions and actions that take place are central around the idea of this object that can be manipulated and transmutated in order to make changes and or record data. So with these objects, we're able to build logic structures that essentially do what we want. So with that, keep in mind that everything we'll be working with and everything I introduced today is an object. And before we get into the definition of things, we'll actually do a little thought experiment on how we could objectify or classify things that are in our lives. For example, maybe something that maybe it's a practice you can implement in going to the grocery store and looking at different fruits. Or it's something you could do while going for a walk outside and classifying the trees. With that, let's go ahead and transition into that mental practice I had brought up. So, in order to understand the object-oriented programming, or just the idea of objects and classifications of things in order to create objects, is a pretty simple practice, and it's pretty much just what you do when you index and or organize something like a library. Really, you can sort by properties that you decide on yourself. So, for example of this first practice, simply just try and classify yourself, just like you would, just like how Pokemon are classified within the games, or just how animals are classified in the animal kingdom. With classification, we can go ahead and look at something like our school IDs and or an actual ID and look at what we're able to pull in terms of information, which really ends up being an object representing what we are. So for me, I would have my name as one of the variables or parts of the object that encompasses what I am, as well as things like my photo, my gender, my birthday, my blood type, even potentially, whether I'm a donor. All these things, all these little bits of information could apply to 100 different things, but in this instance specifically apply to the object that is me and or my ID or school ID. So with that really is a pretty simple understanding of what the object, what an object structure will be like, and as we dive into JavaScript, we'll learn how to use that simple classification of an object to have programs function. So with that, let's go ahead and actually look at one of the first objects, which in some instances might just be a standard variable in other languages, but with JavaScript we find that almost everything is treated as an object. This creation of our first object will also kind of relate to what we had done last week in creating the console command printout. One of the inputs, and the only input we actually gave the printout last week, is a form of a variable. And variables will be one of the most important things to understand within JavaScript, because really they are the starting point for inputs and or data you can represent within JavaScript. And in order to really program and have things work, representing data is probably a great place to start. So, to begin, in order to represent data in JavaScript, you have a couple of different options, but we'll start off with the baseline, simple to understand version of object creation within JavaScript. So, to do so, I will simply type out a 3-letter character referred to as var. Var stands for variable, and a variable, just like in math, is a placeholder for whatever data we want to enter and or have that variable hold. So, if we'd like, we can go ahead and set var, and here we'll actually begin with a bit of the syntax that specifically pertains to JavaScript, something you won't find in CSS or HTML in some cases. So, with each variable, we actually have to name it. And in this case, we'll just name our variable something simple, var x. And I'm going to keep it lowercase in this instance, and set it equal to, in this instance, the number 2. Now, just like in the other languages, we have to have a way to also tell the program to end in terms of reading a line of logic. So in this instance, for JavaScript, we usually and almost always end a statement and or a variable definition or a function with a semicolon. Now, don't dig too deep into what I just explained. Simply know that the important information right now is the setup or definition of a variable with the name of x and with a value of 2. So, if we went ahead and console.logged the material just using the same logic we used last week, and then put in the variable x, and placed a semicolon afterwards, save, and then looked at our inspector with just 1 second. Let me get this in here. Oh, not what we're looking for. And with this in the drawer now, we'll see our console log out are the value of x, and it might not automatically do it, but with a refresh of the page, we have our 2 printed out. So like that, we created a simple variable for a number, and in this case, this number is what's identified as a standard integer. So an integer is just your basic normal number that doesn't have a lot of following decimals, it doesn't have percentages, it's just a simple flat number that keeps it simple for the computer. Past this, and we'll go ahead and close our window now, or actually just minimize this and expand this a bit. We'll go ahead and actually change what our variable is. Though we don't see it just yet, this variable of just a simple number 2 is already acting as an object, but we'll dig into that in the next episode. To finish off today's episode, I'd like to show you the other data types that are available within the scope of JavaScript as well. And in this instance, the most important one that we'll need to explore for our upcoming projects will be the string. With a string, we're able to actually enter text into or a set value of text equal to really hexadecimal values, but all that matters to you is the fact that you want to write out the sentence, "Hello world," just one last time again, and with that, transfer it into our console.log. With that, you can see as our program updates, automatically our hello world is printed out because x, instead of being equal to 2, is again equal to the string, and in this instance we'll differentiate integers and strings and now have it set equal to hello world. Past this, we'll actually, in the next episode, explore an actual object and or how to make objects. So, more than just a number and maybe some text, we'll actually learn how to make objects that hold many objects within them, and you'll actually find that that is a common pattern and a never-ending tunnel when it comes to JavaScript. So, with that, hopefully you'll join us next week, where we'll continue on exploring JavaScript and how to just figuring out the building blocks to get started. So with that, have a nice week.